Hello and welcome to the Sustainability Uncovered podcast from Edie. Coming up on today's episode, how are energy-intensive manufacturing businesses turning Britain's hydrogen hype into a practical decarbonisation strategy? We asked Kimberly-Clark sustainability leader Oriol Margó.
But when it comes to green hydrogen contractual solutions, everything started from zero. We had to develop, brainstorm, everything. Think how would that work? And that happened for the technical part, for the commercial side, everything. And all of that is available now for other people to use,
And are the world's industrial clusters cutting emissions as quickly as they'd first hoped to at the turn of the decade? We are in discussion with the Mission Possible Partnership's CEO, Faustine Delasalle.
But in a context in which their green steel is still more expensive than grey steel, sustainable aviation fuels are more expensive than jet fuel, we need policy frameworks in place to really drive demand for those products.
All of that and more on this month's podcast. Yes, hello and welcome along to Sustainability Uncovered, the monthly podcast show from the award-winning Edie editorial team. This is the podcast for anyone working in, studying or just curious about environmental sustainability and business. I'm Edie's content editor, Sarah George, and you're probably listening to my voice at either the very end of November 2025 or the beginning of December. So it's just me in the podcast studio today because I think that post-COP30 exhaustion and pre-Christmas jitters have hit the team in full force. So we have spent the last several weeks producing and publishing, alongside our regular day jobs, including news and features, a daily podcast bringing you all the news and views from COP30, the UN Climate Conference in Belém, Brazil. So if you've missed that limited series, you can search for COP30 Covered wherever you get your podcast to catch up. And if you do so, you'll be able to access some interviews with great guests, including Annie Dasgupta, who is the CEO of the World Resources Institute, and Jack Hurd, who leads the Tropical Forest Alliance. So moving on from COP, for today's episode of Sustainability Uncovered, we're back to our regularly scheduled programme, which is the business of keeping listeners and readers abreast of the latest in sustainable business, largely through the form of exclusive interviews with expert guest speakers. And our theme for this episode, as it always is this time of year, is Net Zero November. So Team Edie have been hosting a themed Net Zero November focus every year since 2019. So this was back when the UK government launched a new campaign of this name to increase awareness of and understanding of its new 2050 climate target. So the UK government may have dropped that campaign largely due to just so much change since then, but we are still keeping a focus on. So there are, of course, loads of ways in which you could approach net zero, which is a massive topic for a podcast. But for the next 45 minutes or so, we've chosen to focus on the practicalities of decarbonisation and the energy transition for businesses. So something that has been increasingly discussed this year amid some high-profile rollbacks of corporate emissions reduction commitments, particularly in the finance and energy sectors. But most companies are standing strong to their targets or even setting new ones. But after the heady target setting heydays of 2020 and 2021 especially, many businesses are now grappling with the much more complex work of delivery. So with that in mind, our first interviewee for the episode is Oriol Margó, who is sustainability leader for Kimberly-Clark. He, in that role, is the business's programme manager for fuel switching in the UK. Kimberly-Clark is the owner of brands including Andrex and Huggies. It's a major consumer goods giant, and it's one of many manufacturers interested in off-taking green hydrogen in the UK in order to decarbonise its operations. So this is something that the company's been working on for several years. I caught up with Oriol to find out how these plans are progressing and what advice he'd give to other businesses looking to firm up their fuel switching plans on the road to net zero, especially if they're looking to do something a little bit different. Here is that interview with him in full. Thank you so much for your time, Oriol. How are you?
Yeah, very well, Sarah. Thank you for the invite.
No, thank you very much for hopping on and updating us about all things to do with renewables and hydrogen within the business. And I know there's been quite a lot of movement there, and people who read edie regularly will probably have been following it. But for listeners who are a bit new to this, it would be great to hear a little bit about the history of the green hydrogen strategy in the UK for the company.
No, thank you very much. This is a piece of work that started a long time ago, 3 years ago, I believe, even a bit more when we started looking at hydrogen as a technology. I would say that Kimberly-Clark doesn't have a hydrogen strategy. Hydrogen or green hydrogen is one of the different ways to decarbonize heat that we are exploring. And we started working on it to respond to a vision to deliver 100% renewable energy by 2030, which is an extremely ambitious ambition because we are an energy intensive company. And to that extent, we started to look at decarbonizing electricity in our sites, and we signed a few years ago a power purchase agreement with the Octopus Group, which led to the construction of a wind farm in Scotland, now supplying 80% of our renewable electricity. But the heat is a big issue. So we have been exploring several technologies in the UK, electrification, biomethane. We were monitoring green hydrogen because it's one technology that we can leverage. It can be stored. And then we saw that the UK was one of the first countries in the world to support the development and innovation on green hydrogen. So we formed two partnerships for both of our sites to start looking into it, and that led to the signature of the two offtake contracts that we announced a few months ago. Quite innovative in the UK and beyond, especially in the consumer goods companies.
Yeah, and this is something we're seeing, like a few businesses are really starting to think about hydrogen for manufacturing. But I think, as you've alluded to, this is still quite innovative, still quite disruptive, and definitely something that you can't do alone. You know, like most businesses aren't cut out to self-generate hydrogen, to store hydrogen. So what support have you had for your hydrogen work? Who have been your partners in this work?
We had a lot of support, and we have been a support ourselves, right? Because this is a new technology that is being developed. Look at some of the technologies that are quite mature now. They were in similar position maybe 20 years ago. So we have been forming a partnership with developers. Carlton Power is our partner in Barrow, and Hyro, which is a joint venture between the Octopus Group and RES Development in Northfleet. And together we have brought this project, made the applications for the support grants with government, which is, of course, a big partner in this. And then, of course, we have had to work with technology developers. Our partners have been working with electrolyzer manufacturers. We have been working with technology providers for our process equipment, dual fuel boilers. So all of this is technology that it's not necessarily ready available, or is not readily available in the form that we need it, right? So there has been a lot of work, and the most important is a partnership, because the risk is high and the risk is not going away. But the important is to share the risk. And that's where our developers, partners have taken some risk. We are taking significant risk as well. Government is taking a risk. And if each of us are taking some benefits from it, right? In our case, decarbonizing our brands, our developers can develop new technologies, government can incentivize work and reduce the cost for future users of hydrogen because of the learnings we provided.
Got it. And I'm sure we can dig into some of this in a little bit more detail, but I also wanted to come back to something that you mentioned, and you mentioned that hydrogen is one option that the business is exploring for heat, and that it's just one piece of this jigsaw on the road to 2030. So where does it fit into, a broader approach to different low carbon technologies for manufacturing in the UK?
Yeah, so it's one element. Each technology have their benefits and inconveniences. We have looked many things. I mean, my team have looked at electrification. We have looked at biomethane. We looked at green hydrogen. We looked at thermal storage. We looked at electric battery storage. We looked at everything. And I'm not sure hydrogen is the right technology to get us to 100%, because one of the complications is that it's not that flexible, in the sense that it requires us to match the electricity generation, renewable electricity generation, to the consumption of the electrolyzer that produces the hydrogen, plus minus 30 minutes. In fact, forget the commercials. That complexity is probably the one that kept us busy for many years in negotiation. So that means that if there is no renewables, we cannot produce. It means that we need to store. So that means that in a world where we are nearly 100% decarbonized, that variability, if there is no renewables, is very difficult to manage. So we will have to look at other things. Like biomethane is something we looked at, but it requires an inflow of organic waste and a guaranteed inflow to make the project work. And at the moment, we don't have that guarantee of supply. We hope that with government collecting organic waste, maybe this could be possible. And of course, electrification is the most direct way to do it. But electrification, if there is no renewables, then you need to store in battery storage, and that is really costly and complicated. And the cost of electricity is high. So every technology have their complexities, and we believe that the future will be a mix of all of them. I mean, in Germany, we have just announced the electrification of the production site, Koblenz. In Spain, we're using biomass, so we are diversifying our energy mix.
I was going to ask about that because I know your role has this international dimension, and as you mentioned, the UK is quite unique in that the government moved early in setting a 2030 strategic vision for low carbon hydrogen production and the supporting business models. So when you're looking at different technologies in different markets, is that the key factor? Is it the policy environment?
It is certainly a factor. Our objective is to decarbonize, and decarbonize in a way that is efficient for us, that we can afford it, that our customers and consumers can afford it, and in a way that it's the most sustainable way, and it's convenience, and it delivers the energy security we need. So there are many factors at stake, right? So we are balancing the decision based on many things. It's not just efficiency, it's not just cost, it's not just how easy it is to implement. So and regulatory environment is key. And we will adapt to whatever each country, its regulatory environment want to focus. So in the UK, there was an early move to green hydrogen. So we went into that, and we have supported the development of these new business models, right? Because if you think of it, I'll give you an example. We have signed in the last 4 years, I think it's 7 power purchase agreements, both off-site virtual and on-site. And when you discuss with solicitors, lawyers, there is always a precedent. The market standard for this clause in the contract is this. So there is always learning brought in. But when it comes to green hydrogen contractual solutions, everything started from zero. We had to develop, brainstorm, everything. Think how would that work? And that happened for the technical part, for the commercial side, everything. And all of that is available now for other people to use, So in that sense, people that come after will have an easier journey, And we've done the same in Germany with electrification. We have a support from the German government, and we are just using different technology. And we are open to any other incentives or support or innovation partnerships that other places may bring in.
Got it. And it's been great to get insight into what is such a complex project. As you say, lots of moving parts, different contexts to consider, from regulation to supply. And I like that you call it an energy journey as well. And I'm sure we've got other manufacturing businesses that are listening, thinking about maybe how their own energy journey can and should be taking shape in the months and years ahead. So it'd be great to get your advice for those businesses, especially if they are looking to do something that would be particularly disruptive or new to them.
Yeah, I think this is a very good point, and this could work beyond green hydrogen. Anything that is disruptive, because when you have an idea which is quite disruptive, it's very difficult to get this initial support, right? So one important bit is to have a very clear vision, but it's very important to understand that innovation, when it's true innovation, you don't have the answers. If you have the answers, it's not innovation, right? So because of that, it's very important to basically look at the vision and then go in stages, right? I mean, often teams, we make the mistake to say, I want to put 2 green hydrogen plants, 1 in each site, and it will be an investment of £125 million. Well, you mentioned this 3 years ago, and we wouldn't have had a chance, right? Because how do you do it? Well, how are you planning to pay for it? So you need to get exploring, learning, and get the bare minimum commitment to get you to the next stage, and slowly build the knowledge which will reduce the risk of the project. So there are many lessons that we learn about failure and how failure can help your success and learn. About communicating with the stakeholders. There has been a lot of things, and most important, to listen different views and have a very diverse team when it comes to thinking. It has been really challenging for our hydrogen team because we had innovators, entrepreneurs, we have risk takers, we had risk avoiding, and there was real team challenges connecting, but we did realize this was helping us go to the right solutions.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you mentioned that there's different people that are needed in the room, because I sincerely hope that it's not just yourself that was involved in this, right?
Yeah, definitely not. I have a big team I need to credit at Kimberly-Clark. A lot of people putting many hours. I'm just the person that come and explain, but there is a big team that passionate, committed and dedicated, and you need that to overcome all the barriers and that we have been put in front, and resistance or more than resistance. In this project you find a bit of indifference because it's normal. People don't know how is this going to work, and when there is uncertainty, it's very difficult for people to really get engaged. So you need to overcome all of that, but it's part of the business. It's normal, and then you get into a place where you can get strong solutions if you could overcome all these challenges.
Got it. So it sounds like it's just as much about communication and connection and checking in as it is sort of really deep technical energy work.
Yes, certainly. Yeah.
Got it. And Oriol, I've really thoroughly enjoyed speaking to you about this particular project. Excited to see where it goes in the months ahead. But that is all the time we've got for this particular chat, for this particular episode of Sustainability Uncovered. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
Big thank you once again to Oriol for his time. So I'm just going to take a really brief break. Join me after the jingle when we'll be zooming out to take a more global look at the decarbonisation of manufacturing and heavy industry beyond hydrogen and beyond the UK. Hello and welcome back to Sustainability Uncovered, the Net Zero November 2025 edition. After taking a really specific look at one business's particular energy transition strategy in the first half, we're now able to zoom out a bit and look at the global state of play in decarbonising manufacturing and heavy industry. So at least 15% of annual global CO2 emissions can be attributed to industrial clusters, and that proportion is even higher in certain markets. For example, it's been claimed that around 75% of India's CO2 emissions each year come from industry. And most of the businesses in industrial clusters cannot be phased out. They're producing things that we will require for decades to come, like steel, cement, chemicals, and inputs for agriculture. But they'll need to do so in different ways if they are to play their part in meaningfully addressing the climate crisis. And it's because of this important mission that the Mission Possible Partnership was created in 2019. So this is a global initiative. You've probably heard of it around COPs. It mobilises business, finance and policy in the hope of speeding up the shift to clean manufacturing. But so many headwinds have faced manufacturing and other industries in the 6 years since, from the pandemic to the energy price crisis to supply chain disruptions to now the Trump effect. So I was keen to see how progress is actually taking shape in the real world. So our senior reporter, Sidhi Mittal, asked Faustine Delasalle, Chief Executive of the Mission Possible Partnership and lead for the Industrial Transition Accelerator, to give us a bit of a temperature check. So what's happened since 2019, for better or for worse, and what are the remaining biggest challenges and opportunities for decarbonising industry? This interview explains all. Here it is in full.
Hi, Faustine. Thank you for being here. How are you?
Pleasure to be with you today.
Absolutely a pleasure to have you as well. For our listeners who may not be familiar with Mission Possible Partnership, could you please explain what it is and how does it fit into the bigger picture of helping heavy industry reach net zero?
So the Mission Possible Partnership was founded back in 2019 to drive the clean transition of the energy-intensive industrial sectors like steel, cement, chemicals, and help them reach net zero emissions. So we've been a pioneer in this space, and over the past couple of years, we've really focused our attention on how do we make clean industrial projects happen on the ground across a varied set of geographies. So that's what we major on.
And you work across sectors that are notoriously hard to decarbonize, as you mentioned, like steel, cement, shipping, aviation. What do you think connects these industries in the wider net zero challenge?
I think they have a few things in common. One is that they use technologies that is slightly less proven than in other sectors, so there's still a technology risk attached to those developments. The other is that they all face a green premium still. I like to also call it a dirty discount, because it's really because we are not taking into account the negative impacts of the fossil-based technologies, that there is still a premium for the new sets of technologies and clean technologies in those sectors. But in a context in which their green steel is still more expensive than grey steel, sustainable aviation fuels are more expensive than jet fuel, we need policy frameworks in place to really drive demand for those products. And that's a big thing that they have in common. And I'd say the last thing that they have in common is that they usually can't be directly electrified, at least not yet. We don't have the technologies to do it yet. So they require alternative decarbonization technologies. It's often a mix of hydrogen or hydrogen derivatives, bio-based solutions, and some carbon capture. So this is what they generally share.
And we have seen, when it comes to aviation, more and more airlines investing in sustainable aviation fuel in the recent few years. And then with shipping, we had the International Maritime Organization talks earlier this year about the new net zero strategy. And while the vote did not go through on putting a cap on emissions from this sector, there's still this sense that the decarbonization of these industries is finally moving from talk to action. How would you describe where we are right now? Are we still in the early innings? Or are we entering the scaling phase?
Trying to see the glass half full. So the glass half full picture is that we've gone from nobody believing it was possible to decarbonize those sectors 6 or 7 years ago to 1,000 commercial scale projects in the pipeline, and 144 of those actually passed final investment decision today. So it's a massive scale up that we've seen is still very small compared to the total production in those sectors globally today. But we're starting to reach, for instance, in shipping, we're starting to reach a level of ammonia and methanol production that could represent a couple of percentages of shipping fuels if it came to fruition. We're starting to see that the sustainable aviation fuels pipeline, if it was to be realized, could represent up to 10% of current jet fuel consumption. So we're starting to reach numbers that are meaningful. We're still in the very early stages of that scale up, but we're starting to see that scale up, at least in the fuels and the chemical sectors. We're a bit lagging behind on the material sectors.
And what do you think is guiding that momentum? What's changed in the past 2 years or 2 or 3 years? Is it technology readiness? Is it policy momentum? Or is it more corporate willpower?
Technology has improved thanks to initial corporate willpower and investment from leading corporates to develop and test and demonstrate those technologies. What is now driving progress is policy, and in particular policies that drive demand for shipping fuels, demand for aviation fuels, demand for lower carbon building materials, etc. And the reason why I think policy is driving progress is not only because of the climate imperative, it is partially because of policy commitments to net zero, but it's also because I think governments have realized that this is an industrial competitiveness issue, not just a climate issue. And it's the combination of both that is driving policy momentum.
And just talking about competitiveness for a second, which sectors are moving faster than you expected? Are there any sectors that are moving faster than the others? And which ones are proving the hardest to crack?
So where we're seeing greatest momentum is really in fuels for shipping and aviation, because, and for other sectors, because the ammonia and methanol, which are potential fuels for shipping, could also be used for other things. Ammonia can be used for the production of low-carbon fertilizers. Methanol can be used in other transport sectors and also in the chemicals industry. So because they have multiple potential buyers, it's easier to scale those sectors, and there are demand creation mechanisms in place. Sustainable aviation fuels mandates, you mentioned earlier the IMO frameworks, even if they haven't been adopted this October. There's been a methanol mandate in the transport sector in China that has really driven investment in methanol in China. That's where we see the greatest momentum. Where things are lagging behind are really in the material sector. Aluminium, steel, cement to some extent, especially for carbon capture on cement. And that's because we are lacking the same level of policy frameworks that would create demand for low carbon materials.
And what do you think is slowing the rollout of policy within those industries? Is it the lack of demand for clean products? Is it the lack of right infrastructure or permissions, finance? What do you think are the biggest blockers for those industries?
I think it's really lack of demand. When we speak to project developers, that's the number one issue that comes back again and again and again. If you have a demand pool, companies know how to structure the supply chain, and there will still be some bottlenecks on planning and permitting, on access to the right energy infrastructure, and on financing, especially in emerging and developing markets. But you can't solve any of the other issues if you don't have a demand pool. So that's really where we're spending a lot of time figuring out how to scale demand, both in advanced economies, but also in emerging markets.
And you mentioned that, for some countries, clean industry is becoming like a new arena for global competition. You mentioned China, here in the UK. So how do you see the balance shifting? According to you, who is leading and who is catching up, but also who risks being left behind?
So clearly what the data from the last edition of our global project tracker shows is that China is leading. 40% of the projects that have reached final investment decision are in China. Over the past couple of years, this has accelerated. 60% of the projects that have reached final investment decision in the past couple of years are in China. And what we're seeing is that many projects that are happening in the rest of the world also use Chinese technologies. So there's a real dominance in the making here. It isn't to say that there aren't opportunities for other countries. We're also seeing a big pipeline develop in what we're calling the industrial sunbelt of the world. The countries that have a lot of solar potential and can therefore produce cheap electricity abundantly and attract energy-intensive activities and industries that will require abundant, cheap electricity. And that's a lot of emerging and developing economies. It's Australia as well, but it's India, it's Brazil, it's Egypt, it's Namibia, it's the Middle East. So there's a big opportunity in that part of the world as well. There are other countries that are maybe not moving as fast as we would expect and as they should to stay competitive. And that's primarily North America and Europe. And what we're seeing there is that because those regions have had historically one of the most advanced policy framework, they actually have a big pipeline of projects. But those projects really struggle to get to final investment decision to come to fruition. And so there's an implementation gap in those countries, despite the fact that they have a big pipeline of projects.
Thanks, Faustine. You mentioned a lot more projects reaching final investment decision stage in China, and I know reaching that stage is an achievement for businesses, but also a big challenge, like how to get there. And I know MBP's work often focuses on creating the right conditions for projects to reach FID status. So what have you learned about what actually gets a project over that line?
Two layers, I think, to that question. One is what conditions you need for projects to move forward, and it often comes down to policies that drive demand for clean products, access to clean energy at a low cost, and financial de-risking for projects that still have a certain level of risks attached because they're first of a kind or second of a kind. But then what we're also seeing working with project developers is that there are characteristics in the companies that really succeed that are quite unique. One of those is that they're investing in clean industry because they see it as a strategic move, not as a compliance to climate policy imperative. It's really a strategic move that they believe will define the business viability of the company over the long term. I think they're also generally working very well across the value chain. You need a lot of collaboration with upstream supply chain and energy providers and clients to make it work. And so we're seeing companies that know how to work in partnerships with others succeed. We're also seeing more and more companies doing vertical integration across their supply chain to be more in control of all of the elements of the supply chain. And we're seeing companies that have strategic patient capital also be able to invest more because they can take greater risks. That includes companies that are state-owned or that have an element of state ownership, but also privately owned companies as opposed to publicly owned companies. So those are some of the kind of corporate-specific characteristics that we're seeing as helpful to succeed.
Thanks, Faustine. And this might be my final question, but how can global cooperation avoid repeating the mistakes of past industrial booms? We've seen in the past years, most of the value in technology has stayed concentrated in richer countries. And I know you mentioned that there's appetite and there's growth opportunities in emerging and developing countries as well. So how can we avoid our past mistakes?
So I think emerging and developing economies, especially those in the Sunbelt of the world, have a tremendous opportunity for clean industrialization in front of them because they have the right fundamentals in terms of energy and mineral supply. They have a growing domestic demand, and they're not burdened by legacy assets, old steel or cement plants that would need reshuffling and reinvestment. So those are tremendous strength for them to take the lead on that next industrial revolution. And I think advanced economies, including in North America, Europe and Asia, will have to realize that the balance of power and the balance of industrial power is shifting, and that it is in their interest to develop productive win-win trade partnerships with emerging and developing economies to maintain a competitive, clean industry. Where I see the biggest risk from a geopolitical perspective is in the concentration of the equipment manufacturing for a clean industry in one country, China. And I think that's a bigger risk at this stage than the risk of leaving emerging and developing economies behind.
Unfortunately, this is all the time that we have for discussion today. Thank you so much for the insights, and I'm sure our listeners will also find this episode as interesting and insightful as I have. So thank you once again, Faustine. For now, this is a goodbye from Faustine.
Thank you so much, Sidhi.
And a goodbye from me. Goodbye.
Thank you once again to Faustine for her time and sharing all of her insights. So she was our second and final guest interview for this podcast. So we're almost at a close. But before I round off, I do have a few edie dates and resources for your diaries and for your attention. So, as I mentioned earlier, we've just wrapped up on our limited series of podcasts, COP30 covered. So if you missed anything from the summit or do just want to access a high-level interview on any of the summit's themes, please do check those out. You can find the episodes wherever you normally get your podcasts. We also have a wealth of written resources on the COP on edie.net, our website, including a post-summit debrief report. So once again, our site is edie.net and you can find everything under the COP30 tag there. So before you know it, we're heading into December, so things are naturally a little bit quieter on the events front as everyone starts to wind down for Christmas and take time off after quite a hectic few months. But if you are the type to plan ahead, we do have tickets available now for ED26, our biggest event of the year. So we'll be convening more than 1,000 attendees and more than 100 speakers in London for 2 days of networking, debating and co-creation on a whole array of sustainable business topics. So beyond the energy transition, we'll also be looking at things like green skills, reporting and nature strategies. So whether you're a junior analyst, a head of sustainability, or you're working in another business function and your company's green team keeps coming to you, we'd love to see you there in London in March. You can search for ED26 online for full details and it'd be great to meet some of you there. Of course, until then, we will be back every month with a new episode of Sustainability Uncovered. So this isn't the last you'll be hearing from me before Christmas. However, for today's episode, it is a goodbye from me. Goodbye.